And I'm going to, good morning, everyone. I'll just wait a few more moments to make sure everyone is fully connected here. All right, it looks to me that we have everyone. So good morning. I will go ahead and get started. I'm Hearing Officer Nicole Kinsey with the Administrative Hearings Office of the State Water Resources Control Board. This is the second day of the rebuttal portion of the hearing for Phase 1B on the Kern River applications, and we're continuing from yesterday. This hearing, I'll do a briefer version of our introductions in the morning, but this hearing is being conducted by Zoom web conference and is also being broadcast live on the AHO YouTube channel. And both the audio and video are being recorded, and we will post those files to the AHO FTP site. The YouTube recording will also be available on our AHO YouTube webpage. As usual, if you're experiencing any technical difficulties today, please email us at adminhrgoffice@waterboards.ca.gov. Assisting me today are our same staff of the Administrative Hearings Office. Nicole Mullen will be handling the slides, thankfully, once again today. We also have Amy Blunk, Skylar Anderson, and Kyle Wooldridge. And for my witnesses, when you're testifying, you can simply ask Ms. Mullen to advance to the next slide when you're ready during your presentation, and she will handle that. And as usual, attorneys, you may ask Ms. Mullen directly to bring up a particular exhibit as you need that. If at any time I'm experiencing technical difficulties and I'm not able to rejoin you right away, someone from the Administrative Hearings Office will call a brief recess, and we will, until I'm able to rejoin you. As usual, we will take breaks today. Please don't hesitate to ask for a break. We will take an hour for lunch, and we will have a hard stop by 5 p.m. At the end of the day today. I am not going to go through all of the appearances. I will just ask if there's anyone other than our witnesses who did not have a chance to introduce yourself yesterday. If you would please speak up and identify yourself. All right, well, we all know each other, so that's great. I think where we left off yesterday, we had completed the testimony of Ms. Boisevane, and we were looking, I believe, to Mr. Parker as the next witness for KBWA. Before we jump in this morning, are there any other procedural matters or other issues we should address before we get started and hear from Mr. Parker? All right, with that, I will turn to you, Mr. Bivens. Are you prepared to call Mr. Parker as your next witness?
It'll be me this morning, Ms. Kinsey. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, we are ready.
Wonderful. I'm changing my gallery view so I saw Mr. Parker earlier. There. Good morning, Mr. Parker. If you would please go off mute and I will administer the oath.
Go.
There we go. I can hear you. Please raise your right hand. Mr. Parker, do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you will give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. You may proceed, Mr. O'Brien.
Thank you, Ms. Kinsey. Mr. Parker, is KWBA 328 a true and correct copy of your written rebuttal testimony?
Yes, it is.
And is KWBA 336 a true and correct version of the PowerPoint you prepared for your rebuttal testimony?
Yes, it is.
And Ms. Mullen, if you could pull up KWBA 336, and I believe Mr. Parker will also be referring to Buena Vista 408, which is one of the maps. Please proceed whenever you're ready, Mr. Parker.
Actually, I think I need to change the display settings on my computer quickly because I cannot see the PowerPoint. I apologize.
Take your time, Mr. Parker. I think we've all been in that situation.
Oh, okay, here I see it now. Okay. First of all, I'd like to make a correction to my testimony. I indicated a deep well completion was used rather than a shallow completion in Dr. Miller's testimony, and that was a mistake. And I apologize to Dr. Miller for that. The mistakes are in paragraph 19 and paragraph 20, and the entirety of paragraph 19, and paragraph 20, the last bullet point in my written testimony, and in my summary presentation, slide 9, the first bullet. They should just be disregarded. Next slide, please. Dr. Miller's testimony, I'm going to discuss Dr. Miller's testimony and Mr. Ashlock's testimony regarding hydrogeology, groundwater flow, and Kern water bank pumping. I'm also going to talk about Ms. Melton's testimony regarding the proposal to use the notice order process for allocating Kern River high flow water. Next slide, please. So Dr. Miller made the following statements regarding hydrogeology. This is in Buena Vista 400. So he said Buena Vista 406 shows the location of the major geologic structures in the area that influence the occurrence and movement of groundwater. And that's from a report done by PGA in 1991 and is drawn from a report I helped develop. He then said that he also said the result of the E-clay deformation is that over the Buttonwillow, Bower Bank, and semi-tropic anticlines, the elevation of the base of the E-clay is above the groundwater elevations in the upper aquifer zone where this occurs. The anticlines become barriers to groundwater movement that channel groundwater through the synclines. And then he also said the south to southeast slope or dip of the E-clay influences the general southerly direction of groundwater flow. If we could please skip to slide 5, Ms. Mullen. Okay, this map replicates the contours and the anticline syncline notation from BV 406. And just briefly, an anticline is an upward fold or arch of sediments, and a syncline is a downward fold of sediments. And the contour lines on these maps are lines of equal elevation. So again, Dr. Miller stated that groundwater would flow out the southern end of the district and not over the Bower Bank anticline, for example. You can see the elevation of the syncline at the southern end of the district is actually plus 200 feet. The Bower Bank anticline is lower than that. And so I really don't follow how water would flow over the 200-foot level of the clay at the southern end of the district and not over the Bower Bank anticline. Next, you can see looking at the contours that the dip of the clay is actually to the northwest. You start at plus 200 feet at the southern end and you drop all the way to 300 feet below sea level as you move to the northwest. So the dip or slope is actually in the opposite direction. And then the other thing I wanted to note on this map is you can see some blue arrows. The blue arrows come from a report done by Robert Crutzen, Dr. Robert Crutzen for Buena Vista. And he studied the same geology and used the same structure map in his study. And he indicated that this map with these contours is the definitive definition of the E-clay in the area of the district. So the blue line, he also looked at flow out of the district, and the blue lines indicate where he predicted water would flow out of the district. As you can see, this makes a lot more sense given the geology. Water is not flowing up over the high southern limb of the syncline, but rather to the northeast and a few miles north of the southern end of the district. So now Dr. Miller also presented 4 groundwater maps in his testimony. So if you could please, Ms. Mullen, bring up BV 408. And if you could scroll down a little bit on this. So he used the first two maps to indicate water was flowing down or was flowing south out of the district. If you could scroll down a little bit more. A little more toward the southern end of the district, the bottom of the map there. So here you can see that actually, you can see well 12B, that's also well 14M. We're going to refer to that more later in the presentation, but you can see here the water levels are actually coalescing around that well. This map doesn't definitively show water flowing out of the district to the east. The next, can you scroll down to the next map, please? And again, if you go to the southern end of this map. Now this map is showing water flowing to the south out of the end of the district. That's what these contours represent. They don't show water flowing to the east toward the water bank. The next slide, please. Not next slide, I'm sorry. Scroll down to the next map, please. Now these next maps are intended to show the benefits from recharge in the Palms project. So if you scroll down a little bit further. So the Palms project is in the southern end of the district, kind of where well 12B is, as you can see at the southern end there. Well, this map actually shows water flowing into the district from the south, past the Palms project to that area labeled 190. And I should back up. This actually is not a groundwater elevation map. It's a depth to groundwater map. And you really can't use depth to groundwater maps to determine definitively groundwater flow. But in this case, in the district, the ground levels are essentially flat. So you can make inferences to groundwater flow. And so the inference here would be that water is flowing from the south end of the district toward that area labeled 190, because that's where the deepest part of the water is. If we could scroll down to the next slide. So this map is a groundwater elevation map, which you can use more correctly. And again, Dr. Miller was saying this map shows the beneficial influence of recharge in the Palms project. As you can see, groundwater elevations are actually higher to the east at 140 feet above sea level. And again, the low area is where the 60 is, surrounded by that one contour. So here water is actually flowing into the district, and you really don't see significant benefit at all from the recharge in the Palms project based on these contours. So next, I'd like to, next Dr. Miller reviewed some hydrographs, and in particular for the 2012 to 2016 period in well 14M. He suggested the water level drops seen may indicate water was flowing out of the district and toward the water bank. He did not review the entire data set for that well. Ms. Mullen, if you could go back to my presentation in slide 10, please. Okay, this is the entire record for well 14M or well 12. They both, they have two names essentially for the well. And I've annotated this with a pre-water bank baseline. That's that green line that you see going across. And the shallow interval is indicated by the red lines. So since the inception of the water bank, if you study this chart, in 18 of the 27 years that the water bank's been in operation, groundwater levels have been above that baseline. And in particular note, the area from 1995 through 2000, you can see there's quite a rise shown in that area. Mr. Ashlock actually noted that in his testimony, that there was this rise in water levels during that time in the southern end of the district. So you can see that, again, there's been benefit in the area for almost the entire time that the water bank has been in operation. Now, If you could go to the next slide, please. I'm sorry, actually slide 14. Okay, so the Department of Water Resources modeled what was going to happen on the water bank. They did this for an EIR in 2016. And this slide is kind of a summary of the net benefit or impact of Kern Water Bank operations in different areas. So there's several lines shown. You can see zone 1 is from 0 to 1 mile outside the Kern Water Bank. Zone 2 is 1 to 2 miles outside the water bank. Zone 3, 2 to 3. Zone 4, 3 to 4. And zone 5, 4 to 5 miles outside the water bank. The blue in the back is essentially the cumulative storage in the Kern Water Bank. Shows the cumulative storage. And so the horizontal axis on the left, you can see the 0 line. And then you see negative numbers below and positive numbers above. So what these lines show is, for example, in the 0 to 1 mile area outside the water bank, this shows the benefit that was realized in that area from water bank operations. It also shows the impact. And as you can see, all the lines except the blue line stay above that 0 line for the entire period through 2014. And as you notice too, that the area or the time from 1995 through 2000 definitely shows benefits resulting from Kern Water Bank operations in all areas. And so this kind of matches the rise in water levels that Mr. Ashlock had mentioned at the very southern end of the district. This model was prepared by the Department of Water Resources, and just to note, a similar model has been used since that time to also look at the benefits and impacts that the Kern Water Bank and other banking programs bring to the area. I'd like to move now to Ms. Mullen's testimony. So if you could please go to slide 21. I'm skipping over the part about the part of my testimony about the percolation effects in the Kern Water Bank versus the Buena Vista Lake, because Dr. Davids did a really good job on that yesterday.
Mr. Parker, I
Yes.
think you may have misspoke and referred to Ms. Mullen's testimony. I think you meant.
Oh, Miss Melton's. I apologize to both Miss Melton and Miss Mullen. I'm sorry about that. So Ms. Melton's testimony, she essentially made a proposal to use the notice order process and law of the river for allocating Kern River high flow water. She essentially said this should be used to determine when water is available for appropriation from the Kern River. Now, the law of the river documents, as many people have already testified, do not reestablish any upper limits on the volume of water allocated to Buena Vista. For example, Mr. Ashlock has testified the way the right is divided, there's really no limit mathematically. And in response to a question by hearing officer Kenzie, Mr. Ashlock testified that Buena Vista might have taken more water, for example, in 2017 if it had been available up to a certain cap, depending what is possible. Next slide, please. So stepping back a little bit on the notice order process and law of the river. So when a pre-notice order is issued, a call is issued to all Kern River interests requesting they divert as much water as possible into their conveyance storage systems. And the allocation scheme again developed or contained in the law of the river does not establish any upper limits on the volumes of water allocated to Buena Vista. So if this notice order process and the law of the river were adapted as the mechanism for determining when water is available for appropriation from the Kern River during high flow years, Buena Vista would merely need over time to develop additional diversion and storage capacity in our water transfer arrangements, such that no high flow water would ever be available for beneficial use. And would ever be available for beneficial use by would-be appropriators such as the Kern Water Bank. So whatever right was actually conveyed to Buena Vista in its service area, in its service area would be discarded essentially for an allocation scheme with no limits. I'll finish with the stated intention of the hearings is to consider evidence relative to the validity and scope of claimed water rights in the Kern River system for the limited purpose of determining how much unappropriated water is available to supply the applicants. The notice order process would be, this whole, intention of the hearings would be disregarded with the adoption of the notice order process. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. With that, I'll look to you, Mr. Becerra. Would you, absent any agreements with your colleagues, do you have questions for Mr. Parker, and would you like to proceed with those questions?
You have questions. We do have an agreement among cross-examining counsel. Mr. Cuny will go first. I do have a clarification question though. With Mr. Parker's correction, are we striking portions of his testimony? Or what is the arrangement, just so we have clarity of the record?
That's a good question. Thank you for bringing that up, Mr. Becerra. I think we should strike portions of the testimony that will I'll ask for your input, Mr. O'Brien here, but what I would propose is that KW, you can articulate it again for us now, the portions that are stricken, just to make sure we're on the same page. And then if you would please submit a corrected version, maybe with the strikeout, so we understand what's happening, that would be helpful. But I'll turn to you, Mr. O'Brien. Does that process make sense to you?
Yes, that makes sense. We will certainly submit a corrected version of the testimony, but if you'd like, we can have Mr. Parker maybe a little more slowly walk through the various changes that he mentioned earlier.
Please, let's do that, because I think it may help counsel with cross-examination, and so we can be very clear. So I will turn back to you, Mr. Parker, if you would carefully explain the portions that are stricken, and counsel, Mr. Becerra or Mr. Cuny or Mr. Jacobs, please speak up if you need clarification on any of this.
Yes, I mistakenly thought that Dr. Miller had used a deep completion in a monitoring well rather than shallow completion. And so, as I said, I want to correct that, and I want to apologize to Dr. Miller for that. So the mistakes are in the entirety of paragraph 19 of my written testimony.
Just so the record is clear, Mr. Parker, that's KWBA 328.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien.
And paragraph 20, the last bullet point in that paragraph.
And that, just to clarify, if we can turn, the last bullet point appears on what is marked as on page 8 of KWBA 328. Is that correct?
I don't have it in front of me. Again, it's paragraph 20, but I think that, does that flow into the next page?
I'll look to Mr. O'Brien just to confirm, because it flows into the next page. I just wanted to make sure we all understand.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And then in my summary presentation, slide 9, the first bullet.
And Mr. O'Brien, can I ask you please just to clarify the exhibit number for the presentation?
I believe it's KWBA 336.
336.
That's the PowerPoint, right, Mr. Parker?
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
Are there any questions? I'm sorry, Mr. Parker, and are those the corrections, Mr. Parker?
Yes.
Thank
Yes.
you. Are there any questions from council on that? Is that clear?
Very clear. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Parker, for clarifying that. That's helpful.
Yes.
So, and then I'll ask Mr. O'Brien if you would, when it's convenient, have someone on your team submit a corrected version of both exhibits. That would be helpful. Thank you. And I will then, with that, I think, turn to Mr. Cooney. If you have questions for Mr. Parker, you may proceed.
Very good. Good morning, Mr. Parker. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
I just have a few questions for you, and I want to focus on one aspect of your testimony in this proceeding and hopefully clarify for the hearing officer what you referred to first in your original testimony as the quote, Kern River flood policy, quote, and then in your written rebuttal testimony as the notice order process. And Ms. Mullins, maybe for efficiency, let's first pull up KWBA 328, but also my examination will touch on KWBA 300, 323, and then also North Kern Water Storage District 170. So you can have those in the queue, and that'll hopefully get us through this more quickly. If we could first pull up Kern Water Bank Authority Exhibit 328, and let's go to page 13 and paragraph 40. That's great. Thank you, Ms. Mullins. And Mr. Parker, do you see that exhibit on your screen?
I do.
Great. So in this portion of your May 22nd rebuttal testimony, in the first sentence of paragraph 40, you stated that, quote, the notice order process has no objective triggers, no formal process, and no transparency, correct?
Correct.
Okay. If Ms. Mullins, if you could please, let's now go to Kern Water Bank Authority Exhibit 300, excuse me, 300. And if we go to page 9, paragraph 33. And I know that it's been some time, Mr. Parker, since you submitted this testimony. So why don't you take a moment? Let's read to yourself, just read paragraph 33 so you're familiar with it, and then I'll have a few questions.
Okay.
Okay. So you've had a chance to refamiliarize yourself with this portion of your original testimony?
Yes.
Okay. Now, in the first sentence, you state that the Kern River flood policy concerns the, quote, utilization of Isabella Reservoir flood releases, quote. Is that right?
Yes, that's the title of the quote, or the so-called flood policy.
Okay, and that was one of my other questions. So that's actually what the policy statement says, and you just quoted it, and that's the title that you gave it then, is that right?
Yeah, unless I misspelled something. Yeah, that's the title.
Okay.
On the policy.
And then more specifically, in the third sentence of this paragraph 33, you testify that the flood policy is used, quote, during periods in which, one, abnormal flow is being released from Isabella Reservoir by order of the United States Army Corps of Engineers, quote. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And that reference.
I believe that's come straight out of the flood policy.
Okay. And that policy you're referring to is the United States Army Corps of Engineers flood policy. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And this reference to an order by the Army Corps is what's known as a mandatory release order issued by the Army Corps during flood control operations at Isabella Reservoir.
That's my understanding.
And you indicate also in paragraph 33 that additionally the flood policy is used during periods when Kern River, quote, flow is entering the California aqueduct through the intertie, quote. Is that right?
Yes, and that again, this is directly from the flood policy.
Okay. And is it also true that the balance of your paragraph 33 of your original testimony is actually a quote taken directly from a separate exhibit, Kern Water Bank Authority Exhibit 323, that you referenced in your paragraph 33, right?
Yes.
So that was in the entirety of your original testimony on the Kern River flood policy. Is that right?
Correct.
And you indicated in this paragraph 33 that you included this exhibit, Kern Water Bank Authority 323, as an example of the flood policy. Is that right?
Yes, it is my understanding it is the flood policy. And if you could scroll down, I'd like to see the rest of the paragraph. I just want to make sure that.
Yeah, no, yeah,
Just
absolutely.
want to double check.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. No, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. And according to your testimony that you provided in this paragraph 33, exhibit Kern Water Bank Authority 323 is from the year 1986 as your example year. Is that right?
I believe so. I can't be certain. It was whenever the flood policy was established.
I notice in the first line of paragraph 33, you say
Oh,
since
yes,
at
you're
least
correct.
1986.
Correct.
Okay. Ms. Mullins, if you could please pull up Kern Water Bank Authority 323 and bring us to the first page. Great. And maybe we'll scroll up a little bit. Okay. Now, this is a separate exhibit from the Kern Water Bank Authority rebuttal case. Is that right?
I believe so.
Or excuse me, case in chief. Excuse me, case in chief. I misspoke.
I believe so. I'd have to see the whole document. I think this is this KWBA 336, as you mentioned?
It's 323.
Oh, 323. Okay.
Okay. And this exhibit from the water bank indicates in the second paragraph here that, quote, attached is a form of notice of availability of Kern River water order, quote. But I noticed that this exhibit, Kern Water Bank Authority 323, doesn't have an order form completed by the water bank. Is that right?
No, this is just, an exhibit showing the flood policy.
Okay. Using this form to explain what the flood policy was as you understand it, right? Or is?
Correct.
Okay. Now, in 1986, did the Kern Water Bank Authority actually execute an order under the flood policy for Kern River flood flows before the flows entered the intertie for that year?
Yeah, then the Kern Water Bank didn't exist in 1986.
Okay. If we could, then let's pull up Ms. Mullins' North Kern Water Storage District Exhibit 170. And let's show Mr. Parker both the first page, and so scroll slowly through that. And Ms. Parker, you stop anytime if you want to have a chance to read through it. And then let's go to the second page. Keep scrolling, that's great. And then maybe let's reduce it so we can show the entire second page in one. Thank you, Ms. Mullins. Now, on page 2 of North Kern Water Storage District 170, the water user was the Kern Water Bank Authority. Is that right?
Ms. Kinsey, I'm going to interpose an objection. I think this is beyond the scope of his rebuttal testimony.
Mr. Cooney, are we coming back to the notice order process? I assume you were laying a foundation for that, but maybe you can clarify where we're going, please.
Yeah, I am. I think what I'm going to establish is what he called the Kern River flood policy and the notice order process process is one and the same. They're the same policy. And I'm also addressing his statement in his rebuttal testimony that there's no objective criterion, no conditions, that initial prefatory question, and to indicate and show that actually there are conditions that are specified in the notice order process and in the flood policy that actually do provide conditions and criterion for its operation.
May I respond briefly?
Yes, you may, Mr. O'Brien.
I think those are quite legitimate questions in response to the rebuttal testimony. I do not understand what going back to a 1993 order has to do with answering those questions. So I think it is beyond the scope.
But first of all,
hold on for a second. I'm pausing because I'm having a thought, which is, Mr. O'Brien, respectfully, you may be right, but I think this interests me, so I'm going to overrule the objection on that basis. And you may proceed, Mr. Cooney.
Okay.
Please bring us back to the notice order process, but go ahead.
Well, let's maybe as a foundation matter, Mr. Parker, this exhibit, North Kern Water Storage District 170, is a copy of a 1998 notice order form and agreement signed by the Water Bank Authority and the Water Master. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And in your original testimony, you talked about the Kern River flood policy, and then this is now referred to as the notice order process. My foundational question is, those are actually the same policies. Is that correct?
Well, yes, the notice order process, and the law of the river essentially define, how the notice order process is going to proceed. And I just want to say that, Mr. Cooney, clearly, if the Kern River Water Master is going to finally get to the point where there's mandatory release, clearly people are going to have to indicate to the river water, the Kern River Water Master, their ability to absorb flows. And so that's what this document shows.
And I appreciate that. Let me ask you a few questions, and I think we're going to bring this to a close quite quickly here. So let's look at the first paragraph. Ms. Mullins, if you could go back to page 1 of Exhibit 170. That's great. Thank you. Now, this first paragraph of the 1998 Notice Order Agreement, it states that the Water Master is providing, quote, notice of availability of Kern River water otherwise scheduled for delivery to the intertie for immediate delivery for beneficial use within Kern County, quote. Is that right?
Yes.
And as with the 1986 flood policy, Kern Water Bank Authority 323, this 1998 Notice Order Agreement was executed by the Kern Water Bank Authority after the Army Corps had issued a mandatory release order for Kern River water in Isabella Reservoir. Is that correct?
It's my understanding that there was a mandatory release order prior to this.
So then this agreement was executed after that mandatory release order. Is that correct?
That's my understanding. I can't be absolutely certain of that, but my understanding, I didn't work for the water bank in 1998. But in 1998, my understanding is there was a mandatory release order by the Army Corps of Engineers, and that resulted in what you're seeing here.
And likewise, this 1998 notice order agreement was signed by the Kern Water Bank Authority after the intertie was in operation. Is that right?
I can't be certain about that. I don't know if the intertie had actually started operating at the time that this was signed. Again, I wasn't with the water bank at this point in time.
Do you know of any instance in which a notice order has been executed by any party before there was, in fact, an operation of the intertie commencing?
I'm not certain.
Now, this 1998 notice order agreement was signed by the Water Bank Authority after the reference Kern River water was, quote, scheduled for delivery to the intertie, quote. Isn't that right?
Again, I'm not certain.
That is what the agreement provides that was signed by the authority, isn't it true?
Well, again, I'm not certain if the scheduling had occurred. Again, I'm not certain exactly what happened with the process and the timing of the process.
But you don't dispute that this document signed by the Water Bank Authority, in fact, says that this water had been scheduled for delivery to the intertie.
I'm going to object. Asked and answered. He's indicated he doesn't really know exactly what happened, and I think there's a lack of foundation here.
I'll sustain the objection. Mr. Cooney, can we move forward on this? I think we're a little bit stuck here, please.
Let me ask you this. In reviewing your original testimony and then also your rebuttal testimony, I note you made no mention of any of the several agreements among the United States, the state of California, and the local water agencies providing authorization for operation of the Kern River California Aqueduct intertie. Are you familiar with those terms of these intertie agreements?
I am not.
So when you signed your May 22nd rebuttal testimony, that represented that there's, quote, no objective triggers, no formal process, and no transparency, quote, you had not considered the terms of the agreements governing the operation of the intertie. Is that correct?
I had not.
I have nothing further.
Thank you, Mr. Cooney. From there, I think it's a bit early to take a break, so I'm going to, Mr. Parker, I think you're still on the hot seat. I will turn to Mr. Jacobs. You have raised your hand. I wasn't sure who was next. So Mr. Jacobs, if you have questions for Mr. Parker, please proceed.
Thank you. I'm going to go and then Mr. Becerra will go after I go. Good morning, Mr. Parker.
Good morning.
Your rebuttal testimony offers the opinion that the State Water Board should not use the notice order process as the primary mechanism for determining when water is available for appropriation, correct?
Correct.
Well, how should the State Water Board determine when water is available for appropriation?
That is way beyond my level of expertise. The State Board needs to determine, how to determine if there's water to be appropriated.
Do you have an opinion on what are the conditions when Kern River water is available to appropriate under the pending applications?
I don't have a specific opinion on that.
Do you have an opinion on how the State Water Board staff could or should use Ms. Boyce-Avane's supplemental water availability analysis to develop the actual terms of water right permits?
I am not, I do not have a specific opinion on how the State Water Board should proceed. I think that's in their purview.
You just shouldn't use the notice order process.
I don't think that would be appropriate because, again, the law of the river has no caps on water usage. And again, people could, Buena Vista could continue to expand the amount of water that they could take under the law of the river and essentially eliminate any available water for appropriation in the future.
Okay, but you have no alternative process, correct?
I do not.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. Mr. Becerra, do you have questions for Mr. Parker?
I do.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Parker.
Good morning.
I suspect many times during my questions, I'm going to use the phrase Buena Vista. And by that, I'll mean Buena Vista Water Storage District. Do you understand that?
Yes.
And at times, I'll probably also use the phrase water bank. And when I use that, I'll be referring to the Kern Water Bank Authority. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Mullen, can we please pull up Mr. Parker's written testimony, exhibit KWBA 328? And go to page 12, please. Looking for paragraph 35. And Mr. Parker, you state there that the water bank has never purchased water from Buena Vista. Is that right?
Yeah, the water bank itself doesn't purchase water. Our participants purchase water, but the water bank itself doesn't.
Do you know whether any of the water bank's members have ever purchased water from Buena Vista?
I'm pretty sure that they have.
Do you know which ones have purchased water from Buena Vista?
Not specifically. Again, we don't get involved in, our members, water purchases, et cetera, the sources of the water that we put in the water bank.
Do you know whether any of the water bank's members stored water in the bank that they purchased from Buena Vista?
I don't know. Again, we're not involved in that part of the process.
So if a water bank member purchases water and routes it to the water bank, do you not account for the source of that water?
We account for the water type.
What do you mean by water type?
Kern River State Water Project, Frank Kern Canal. Those kinds of things are taken into consideration.
How do you identify the type of water that one of the bank's members has purchased?
That's a process that goes through the Kern County Water Agency. The Kern County Water Agency tracks the types of water and they report those to us. And of course, we know where water is coming from as it enters the bank. We don't know how much for each participant. We don't know specifically those numbers until later. Those are reconciled later. And then the types of water are also identified.
So is it possible that water purchased from Buena Vista by one of the water bank members has been stored in the water bank?
Section calls for speculation, lack of foundation.
Sustained, Mr. Becerra. I break it down. I think we can get there.
Mr. Parker, you believe that water bank members have purchased water from Buena Vista, correct?
Perhaps. I don't know specifically. Again, we're not involved in that part of the process of, where our participants, where their water comes from specifically.
Okay. Can we please pull up exhibit Buena Vista 213? And thank you, Ms. Mullen. Can we please scroll down just a little so we can see that paragraph? There you go. Thank you. Mr. Parker, do you see that this is a February 28th, 2014 Bakersfield.com article concerning transfers of water by Buena Vista?
It appears to be that. Well, this is actually a report by by Lois Henry. So it, I don't know that what she's reporting is specific or correct, but that's what the document says that's in front of me.
Are you familiar with the entity Paramount Farming?
Yes.
Is that entity now called the Wonderful Company?
Yes, as far as I know, it is.
Does the Wonderful Company have a representative on the Water Bank's board of directors?
Ms. Kanzi, I'm gonna again object. This is beyond the scope of any rebuttal testimony.
Mr. Becerra, will you please connect this to Mr. Parker's rebuttal testimony?
Yes. Mr. Parker testifies that the water bank has never purchased water from Buena Vista. He now has testified that its members do, and that he doesn't know the sources of the water purchased that go into the water bank. And I'm trying to identify if he understands this particular increment of water that was purchased and whether it went into the bank.
I'm going to, Mr. O'Brien, you don't need to respond. I'm going to sustain the objection, Mr. Becerra. I think the paragraph 35, to the extent it needed explanation, you've elicited that explanation from Mr. Parker, and there are limits on apparently on his knowledge. So I think this is the end of this line of questioning. If you will, please move on to the next.
Thank you very much. Ms. Mullen, can we please go back to Mr. Parker's testimony, KWBA 328 and page 10? Thank you. Mr. Parker, in paragraph 28, you assert that Buena Vista largely abandoned its conjunctive use efforts during the 2012 to 2016 drought, correct?
Well, that comes directly from Mr. Ashlock's testimony, where he said Buena Vista did not significantly recharge its conjunctive use system for multiple consecutive years during the 2012 through 2016 drought. So I was just relying on that statement.
It is your statement, however, that Buena Vista abandoned that program during the drought, correct?
Well, I mean, that's pretty plain from what Mr. Ashlock testified.
You aware that Buena Vista's second point allocation in 2014 was about 11,000 acre feet?
No.
You aware that Buena Vista's second point allocation in 2015 was less than 11,000 acre feet?
No.
You aware that Buena Vista's state water project allocation in 2014 was about 1,000 acre feet?
No.
You aware that Buena Vista's state water project allocation in 2015 was about 4,000 acre feet?
No.
Thank you. Ms. Mullen, can we please go to page 13 of KWBA 328? Thank you. And Mr. Parker, do you see your testimony on lines 3 through 11?
Yes.
And on those lines, you discussed Mr. Ashlock's testimony about the second point, right? Correct?
Correct.
Do you understand that Mr. Ashlock was testifying about that right under the Miller-Hagan agreement as it has been amended?
Actually, no. I mean, you're using the term right, and it's really an entitlement under agreements that came about after 1914. So I'm not certain that these can be related back to any kind of pre-1914 right at all.
You use the phrase law of the river documents on line 8, correct?
Yes.
Does that include the 1888 Miller-Hagan agreement?
I believe that's one of the documents that's included.
So that document did precede 1914, correct?
Yes, if it was completed in 1988 or 1888. Sorry.
No problem. Thank you. Would you say you have a strong working knowledge of the documents that comprise the law of the river?
I have a pretty good working knowledge of the law of the river.
Are you aware the Kern Water Bank Authority's lands are bound by the Miller-Hagen Agreement?
No,
Have you read the Miller-Hagen Agreement?
yes.
But you don't know that it,
Yeah, but I didn't read it as a legal document. I read it to the extent of determining, how water is allocated by the law of the river. And it really, my strong knowledge of the law of the river is based on the more recent documents, which set forth the percentages of water that go to the various, river interests.
so you've never read the Miller-Hagen Agreement to determine whether it binds the lands the Kern Water Bank is located on, correct?
No.
Jackson mischaracterizes his testimony.
I'm going to overrule that objection. Go ahead, Mr. Becerra.
Mr. Parker, you've never read the 1888 Miller-Hagen Agreement with the view to determining whether it binds the lands on which the Kern Water Bank is located. Is that correct?
Well, I'm certainly not a lawyer, and so I couldn't really read a document toward that end. I wouldn't rely on my interpretation of such a document.
Thank you. Ms. Mullen, can we please pull up Exhibit Buena Vista 408? And Mr. Parker, just for the record, this exhibit shows January 2015 groundwater contours within Buena Vista's Button Willow service area. Is that right?
No, it's not right.
Okay, can we please go up to the top of the document, please? Oh, my apologies. Can we go to the first page of the document, Ms. Mullen? My error. I apologize, Mr. Parker.
No, that's fine. I was going to point that out to you.
Yeah, the full screen, I get a little confused with it sometimes.
Yeah.
So we're on the first page of Exhibit Buena Vista 408. Does this map show groundwater contours as of January 2015 within Buena Vista's Button Willow service area?
Well, that's what it's supposed to show. I didn't create this map. And so I'm not going to offer opinions on the veracity of the map itself.
Okay. Ms. Mullen, can we please, I guess, pull out on this so we can see the full page? Thank you. And Mr. Parker, is it your opinion that this map shows that groundwater is flowing to the southern end of the Buena Vista Button Willow service area?
That's what the contours would seem to indicate.
The contours don't extend outside of Buena Vista. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate.
The groundwater contour at 120 feet above mean sea level could continue outside the Buena Vista, correct?
That depends on, there's no data outside the district, and that's one of the problems with these maps as well. The monitoring wells in Buena Vista are very linear, and so you really don't get a full picture of what's going on in the area.
Is it possible that water could flow from the 120-foot contour outside of Buena Vista?
Again, I didn't create this map, and so I'm not going to offer opinions on that. I would have to see more information and more data, and that information was not provided.
You have expressed opinions about what this contour map shows in your testimony, correct?
Well, I pointed out that what this shows is there's a low point at the well 12B, which is labeled 110 feet. And so that seems to be the low point. And the contour wraps around that well. So that seems to be the low point in the, as shown by this map prepared by Buena Vista.
But you can't determine whether water might flow from the 120-foot contour outside of the district, correct?
No, I wouldn't do that based on this map.
Thank you. Ms. Mullen, can we please go to the next page of Buena Vista 408? And Mr. Parker, do you see that this map shows groundwater contours as of October 2016?
I do.
And is it your opinion that this map does not show groundwater flowing out of Buena Vista?
What the map does show is that there is, the lowest point is at the very southern tip of the district. And so that open contour at the very bottom end of the district suggests water might be flowing to the south, not to the east toward the current water bank. But again, I'm not going to try and provide an opinion outside of the district boundaries, because again, this map was prepared by Buena Vista and it doesn't rely on data outside of the district. So it's really difficult to provide a specific opinion on that.
Is it possible the water could flow from the 100-foot contour shown on the map to areas outside Buena Vista?
Again, I'm not going to rely on a map prepared by Buena Vista, which does not show any information outside of the district. So I'm not going to speculate on that.
But you have stated opinions based on what this map shows, correct?
Well, yeah, within the district, what it shows at the very southern end is that water might be flowing out the very southern end of the district.
So to the extent you can express an opinion, you believe it tends to show water flowing out the southern end of the district, correct?
Potentially, but again, I did not prepare this map. And so any opinion that I have on this would be tenuous unless I was available to review all of this data and data outside the district.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mullen, can we please pull up exhibit KWBA 329?
And Mr. Becerra, while Ms. Mullen is pulling that up, can you give me an estimate of how much longer you expect to go? And it can be, that's fine. I'm just trying to plan a break.
Understand. First of all, a break right now is fine. I expect to go at least an hour.
Okay, good. So let's go ahead and give Mr. Parker a brief, and all of us a brief break. We'll take 10 minutes. It's 10:04 on my clock. Let's come back at 10:15 and we'll pick up where we left off.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ready when you are, Your Honor.
Thank you. And Madam Court Reporter, I can't help it, but I will say thank you for the respect. No need to call me Your Honor. Hearing officer Ms. Kinsey is just fine.
Okay.
I'm not actually a judge, and I've
Just out of habit for my.
I know it
30 years
is, and I've gotten
training,
after
sorry.
the lawyers, so you no need to apologize. Thank you. It looks like we have everyone back, so I will turn to you, Mr. Becerra. You may continue your questions for Mr. Parker.
Ms. Mullen, can we please pull up Mr. Parker's testimony, exhibit KWBA 328, and go to page 5. Thank you. Mr. Parker, do you see on paragraph 11, you're talking about the 2015, January 2015 groundwater contour map we discussed?
Yes.
And your opinion is that shows that water is not flowing out of the district to the east, is that right?
I really don't have an opinion on that. Again, there's no data outside the district. So the problem with the gradient maps is they don't look at anything outside the district. So.
Well, Mr. Parker, on lines 9 and 10, you expressed an opinion about that subject, don't you?
Well, I say the groundwater gradient coalesces around this portion within the district and not outside the district to the south or east. So there's kind of a circular contour there. And so I'm looking within the district and it shows that low point there. It doesn't show water going south or further east.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mullen, can we please pull up Mr. Parker's exhibit KWBA 329? And Mr. Parker, you prepared this exhibit yourself, is that right?
No, this replicates the contours and anticline syncline notation from BV 406, I believe. Yeah, BV 406. And the groundwater flow areas are from a Sierra Scientific Services report from 2013.
But you prepared the specific document that is KWBA 329, is that right?
Yeah, we did this because it was a lot clearer than BV 406.
Okay, thank you. And the blue arrows indicate the direction of groundwater flow, is that right?
They indicate the groundwater flow direction as opined by Dr. Robert Crutzen, who studied the hydrogeology, the Buena Vista Water Storage District for the Buena Vista Water Storage District.
And those arrows show water flowing east out of the district, is that right?
Northeast.
Northeast, not to the south. Is
Not
that accurate? Okay, thank you.
And again, that's based on his opinion.
Understood. Mr. Parker, I'm now going to ask you some questions about the E-clay, but I want to establish some understandings to start with. Is the E-clay also referred to as the Corcoran clay?
Yes. You'll see that, for example, in Dr. Crutzen's testimony, he indicates the E-clay is essentially the Corcoran clay. Yes.
Okay. And that's a relatively impermeable geologic formation that impedes groundwater flow. Is that right?
That's my general understanding.
Okay. So looking at exhibit KWBA 329, you developed this in part from a 1991 report that Dr. Miller cited. Is that right?
No, it's actually developed from Buena Vista 406, which he referred to in his testimony.
Okay.
And he referred to the 1991 report.
Right. Thank you. And you also based this exhibit in part on your exhibit KWBA 330. Is that accurate?
I'd have to see KWBA 330.
Okay, let's pull up KWBA 330, Ms. Mullen.
And then ask the question again, because.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Mr. Parker, do you see what this is?
Yes,
Did you prepare exhibit KWBA 329 in part based on this document?
yes.
Thank you. Ms. Mullen, can we please go back to KWBA 329? And Mr. Parker, on this exhibit, you depict the E-clay as being on a contour of plus 100 to plus 200 between Buena Vista and the water bank. Is that accurate?
That's what Dr. Miller's testimony provided. Again, this is just a replication of what Dr. Miller provided in his testimony.
On your exhibit KWBA 329, what metric do the plus 100 and plus 200 represent?
Above mean sea level is my understanding.
That's your understanding?
Yes,
You prepared this exhibit, correct?
no, we replicated Buena Vista 406. I did not make any of these contours. I did not make any of the notations. This is just a replication of what was on BV 406.
What did you intend plus 100 and plus 200 to mean in preparing this exhibit?
It indicates the elevation of the E clay or the Corcoran clay as presented by Dr. Miller.
Do you have an understanding of what depth from ground surface those two contours represent?
Well, certainly if you know the ground surface elevation, you can determine the depth to those points.
Ms. Mullen, can we please pull up exhibit KWBA 331? Mr. Parker, this is the hydrograph for the well 14M, correct?
Yes,
And this well is located at the southern end of Buena Vista, is that right?
correct.
And it's about 1 mile from the Kern water bank, is that right?
Approximately.
Do you see that KWBA 331 has two x-axes?
Yes,
And one is elevation relative to average mean sea level on the left, correct?
correct.
And the other represents depth from ground surface, correct?
Correct.
Okay. The elevation 100 mean sea level, above mean sea level, equals approximately 190 feet below ground surface. Is that right?
Correct.
And the elevation 200 feet above mean sea level equals about 90 feet below ground surface, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mullen, could we please go back to exhibit KWBA 329? So Mr. Parker, looking at the plus 200 contour on 329, does that effectively represent a depth to ground surface of about 90 feet?
Yeah, it would seem to be approximately that depth.
And the 100-foot contour represents a depth from ground surface of about 190 feet. Is that right?
Approximately.
Okay. Do you believe those are the actual depths of the E-clay in that area?
No, I don't know for sure. They may be. Again, this was prepared by Dr. Miller and also used by Dr. Crutzen. So
Thank you.
this is their presentation of their thinking on the geologic structure in the southern end of Buena Vista.
Can we please pull up exhibit Buena Vista 407? And Ms. Parker, can we blow that up a little?
Miss Mullen, I think you meant.
I'm sorry, Ms. Mullen. I apologize. Mr. Parker, do you understand this is one of Dr. Miller's exhibits?
Yes, I do.
Do you see that this exhibit depicts the E-clay as being about 400 feet below ground surface at the southern end of Buena Vista?
That would appear to be the case, yes.
Do you see that this exhibit shows the Cross Valley Canal?
Yes, it does.
Does the Cross Valley Canal run through the Kern Water Bank west of I-5?
Yeah, for a distance, yes.
Do you see that on Buena Vista exhibit 407, it depicts the E-clay as being at a depth of 350 feet below ground level?
I do.
You didn't include any information from this exhibit on your exhibit KWBA 329, correct?
No, the intent of KWB 329 was to rebut Dr. Miller's assertions made based on BV 406, and that was it.
So your exhibit KWBA 329 was not intended to rebut this exhibit 407, is that right?
No.
Thank you. Can we please pull up exhibit Buena Vista 816? And I'll represent that this is excerpts of the Kern Groundwater Authority's Groundwater Sustainability Plan. But Mr. Parker, if you'd like to take a minute and scroll through it to confirm that, please feel free.
If you could move down a little bit on the cover.
Just it's approximately 13 pages, just so you know what you're getting into.
Okay. It appears to be the sustainability plan. It's dated January 2020. I wanted to make sure it was the correct date.
Thank you. What is the Kern Groundwater Authority?
It's a joint powers authority that represents different interests in the Kern subbasin that came together to develop groundwater sustainability plans.
And that would be under the state's Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. Is that right?
Yes.
Is the Water Bank a member of the Kern Groundwater Authority?
Yes.
Did the Water Bank rely on the Kern Groundwater Authority's groundwater sustainability plan for purposes of complying with SGMA?
Ms. Kinsey, I'm going to object as beyond the scope of rebuttal testimony.
Mr. Becerra, will you please tie this in to the rebuttal?
Yes, it concerns the credibility of Mr. Parker's statements about the depth of the E-clay. I can cut right to the figure if you like.
Please, let's do that.
Okay. Ms. Mullen, can we please go to PDF page 13? And can we please pull out so Mr. Parker can see the whole exhibit, whole page? Mr. Parker, do you see that this exhibit discusses the depth of the Corcoran clay?
Yes.
Do you see that this shows the Corcoran clay being approximately 400 feet below ground surface at the southern end of Buena Vista's Buttonwillow service area?
I have to zoom in.
Certainly. Do you see that this page of the Kern Groundwater Authority's plan shows that the E-clay is at a depth of approximately 400 feet below ground surface near the south end of Buena Vista's Buttonwillow service area?
Yes.
Do you see that this shows that the E-clay is at a depth of approximately 350 feet below ground surface?
Yes.
within the Kern? Thank you. Did the Kern Water Bank Authority participate in the submission of this plan to Department of Water Resources?
We prepared a chapter which discussed the Kern Water Bank itself as part of the document. This is part of an umbrella document prepared, for the entire group.
Is the water bank's participation in this document the means by which the bank seeks to comply with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act?
In part.
Thank you.
I'd like to answer or go back to a question a statement that Mr. Becerra said. He said that he wanted to challenge the credibility of my understanding of the E-clay. I want to make it very clear. My rebuttal focused on Buena Vista's interpretations of where the E-clay was in BV 406, and also used Dr. Crudsen's characterization of the E-clay. They do not represent my opinion of where the E-clay is. Clearly, I was rebutting information provided by Buena Vista on this issue.
And just to be clear, your rebuttal does not apply to every exhibit Buena Vista submitted on this subject, correct?
No, it applies directly to BV 406 and the statements made by Buena Vista's experts regarding Buena Vista 406 and where water would flow.
Thank you. Speaking of the subject of where water would flow, can we please pull up exhibit KWBA 331? Mr. Parker, I need to make sure I understand, or I need to confirm my understanding with you about what the two lines show. The blue line shows a potentiometric head in the well. Is that right?
Yes.
And a potentiometric head is from a well drilled into a confined aquifer. Is that right?
Or semi-confined. It doesn't have to be. It depends. It could be an unconfined aquifer if it's just completed at depth.
And a potentiometric head is the level to which groundwater rises under pressure. Is that right?
Yes.
The red line here represents a completion of the well in an unconfined aquifer. Is that right?
Probably.
And would that show the actual level of groundwater as opposed to a pressure level?
If it is actually completed across the water table.
Thank you. Do you see that the blue line representing a potentiometric head reaches a low point of approximately 240 feet below ground surface?
I do.
And do you see that the red line representing a groundwater level reaches a low point of about 220 feet below ground surface?
If that's actual groundwater level, that might be potentiometric level as well, depending on where the water table actually is.
If the E clay in this area is located at 190 feet below ground surface, water would have, or groundwater would not flow from here to towards the water bank, correct?
Well, that's an interesting statement. Buena Vista prepared exhibits and prepared and gave testimony that water would flow out of the southern end of the district. And that there would be communication. If you make the supposition that there is communication, that's very different. I'm not making the opinion that there is communication in that part of the aquifer. I'm responding to what Buena Vista prepared and provided in their testimony.
If the E clay was located at a depth to ground surface of 350 feet, would it be possible from water in the location of this well to flow towards the water bank?
Now that's speculation.
Okay. Again, this well is located about 1 mile west of the water bank, correct?
Correct.
Can we please go to Mr. Parker's testimony, KWBA 328? And go to page 10. Looking for paragraph 29. Thank you. Mr. Miller, do you see on lines 15 through 17, you state that the water bank recharged over 760,000 acre feet of water from 1995 through 1998?
Mr. Parker said that.
I'm sorry if I misspoke. Mr. Parker, do you see that on line 15, you testified the water bank recharged approximately or over 760,000 acre feet from 1995 to 1998?
Yes.
You've provided no documentation to support that statement. Is that accurate?
Yes, I didn't provide any documentation in this testimony.
Thank you. Can we please go back to exhibit KWBA 331? Is it your belief that the increase in groundwater levels between 1995 and 1998 shown on this are a result of water banks operations?
Not necessarily.
Do you know whether the years 1995 through 1998 were 4 consecutive wet years on the Kern River?
I believe they were, yes.
Do you know whether the recorded history of the Kern River shows any other period of 4 consecutive wet years?
Well, I have to go back through that. I mean, there's data back to late 1800s.
Thank you. You state the opinion that this exhibit KWBA 331 shows that groundwater levels are above pre-project levels in 18 of 27 years. Is that right?
Correct.
Are you speaking only of the red line on this exhibit?
Yes.
So the blue line doesn't show that, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. So as to the red line, does this exhibit show that groundwater levels in this well a mile away from the bank were below pre-project levels 9 out of 27 years?
Yes.
And how many years does the blue line for the potentiometric head show levels were below pre-project levels?
I don't know. I'd have to look at that.
Has that blue line for potentiometric head been below pre-Kern water bank levels every year since 2009?
Yeah, that appears to be the case.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mullen, can we please pull up exhibit Buena Vista 817? Or actually, it's probably easier. I'm sorry, Ms. Mullen, I'm going to trouble you to go back to KWBA 331. And Mr. Parker, do you see that the red line representing groundwater levels reached its all-time low point in approximately 2016?
I don't know that to be the case because the record only starts in 1992.
You're correct. I apologize. That was an unclear question. Do you see on exhibit 331 that of this period of record, the groundwater level reached its low point in approximately 2016?
Yes. Well, yes.
And do you see that the blue line representing potentiometric head reached its second lowest point in 2016?
Yes.
And it has now reached a new low point as of 2022. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Now, Ms. Mullen, can we please go to exhibit Buena Vista 817? And Mr. Parker, I'll represent this document as excerpts of the Kern Water Bank Authority's appendix to the Groundwater Sustainability Plan, but please feel free to scroll through it if you'd like to confirm.
No, I think this is the document.
Okay, Ms. Mullen, can we please scroll down towards the bottom of page 1? Mr. Parker, you prepared this document, is that right?
I did.
Thank you. Ms. Mullen, can we please go to PDF page 9? And Mr. Parker, let's look at figure 18. Do you see it refers to the Kern Water Bank's storage project balance?
Yes.
And what is that?
Ms. Kinsey, I'm going to again object as beyond the scope of rebuttal testimony.
Mr. Becerra, will you please connect this for me?
I believe Mr. Parker testifies that the water bank has benefited Buena Vista's groundwater levels, and I'm testing the credibility of that opinion.
I'll allow this. I think this may be productive. So go ahead, Mr. Becerra.
Mr. Parker, what does this document mean by storage project balance?
It's the cumulative balance of water in the Kern Water Bank, stored in the Kern Water Bank.
And how does the water bank calculate that balance?
There's multiple agencies that reconcile the water entering the water bank and going in the ground and the water leaving the water bank. And this is the net amount of water in the water bank.
So does this figure 18 indicate that the water bank believed its storage project balance was over 400,000 acre feet to the positive in 2016?
Yes.
And that's the point when the groundwater levels in well 14M reached historic lows. Is that accurate?
Yes, and I want to clear something up. I am not. Dr. Miller stated in his testimony that water levels in the southern end of Buena Vista were tied to water levels in the Kern Water Bank. I'm not making that opinion. If you take that supposition that the shallow aquifer is affected by water bank operations, It has to be a two-way street. I'm not convinced that there is actually communication in the southern end of the district. There's too much misunderstanding about the geology in that area.
Thank you very much. Ms. Mullen, can we please go to Mr. Parker's testimony, KWBA 328? And go to page 8 for paragraph 21. And Mr. Parker, just to try to cut through this a little bit, in paragraphs 21 through 25, you discuss the results of a Department of Water Resources modeling study of the Kern Water Bank. Is that right?
Correct.
And you've provided excerpts of that study?
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Ms. Mullen, can we please pull up exhibit KWBA 332? Mr. Parker, these are the excerpts of the DWR modeling study you submitted. Is that right?
It appears to be the case, yes.
Do these excerpts contain any discussion of the depth of the E-clay that DWR assumed in the modeling study?
I don't believe, well, I don't know. I think they did in the northern part of the Kern Water Bank.
I'm speaking specifically of this exhibit you submitted. Do you know whether this exhibit contains any statement of the assumptions of the depth of the E-clay?
I don't know if this part of the modeling report does.
Do you know whether you've submitted any information showing what assumptions DWR made about the depth of the E-clay?
I don't recall.
This report shows modeling results and not real world conditions. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Ms. Mullen, can we please go to PDF page 38? Thank you. And Mr. Parker, do you see figure 3.2-16?
I do.
And this document shows DWR's modeling of past effects of the Kern Water Bank. Is that right?
Correct.
And does the blue line show that within 1 mile of the water bank's boundaries, groundwater levels were below pre-project levels in 2015?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mullen, can we please go back to exhibit KWBA 328? And please go to page 11 for paragraph 32. Mr. Parker, do you see in this paragraph you discuss a DWR Kern Water Bank feasibility study?
Yes.
And is that document dated 1990?
Yes.
Does the water bank rely on that document to use a 6% recharge storage loss factor in its calculations?
This document was used when the MOU was developed, which used a 6% value.
And Ms. Mullen, can we please pull up exhibit KWBA 334? I apologize, Mr. Parker. I probably should have pulled that up a little earlier. So, Mr. Parker, does the water bank currently rely on a 6% recharge storage loss factor in calculating its storage balance?
Yes.
And do you know whether that 6% is based on this document?
That was the initial, this was the initial document that I believe was used in the development of the Kern Water Bank MOU. And that document resulted in a 6% loss factor. And that 6% loss factor has been used by all the banking programs on the Kern fan.
And is that a 6% loss from water delivered into the bank for calculating groundwater storage?
Correct.
Thank you. Ms. Mullen, can we please go to PDF page 2? And I believe this is document page F-3, just for the record. Mr. Parker, do you see the second paragraph that begins this appendix?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Mull, can we please go to PDF page 17? And can we please rotate it clockwise 90 degrees? And can we please scroll up a little bit? Mr. Parker, do you see at the bottom of table F-7, there's a losses number of 6.3%?
Yes, I do.
Do you know whether that loss factor is the basis for the 6% loss factor that the water bank uses in its calculations?
No, I wasn't around during the negotiations for the losses in the MOU.
Do you know whether the MOU relies on this document to support that loss factor?
No, I have no idea if they use this specific document.
Do you know what the technical base? I'm
Go
sorry,
ahead.
I interrupted you.
No, go ahead.
Do you know whether the 6% loss factor in the MOU has a technical basis?
Well, I think it was based on the understanding that previous studies had indicated losses would be, in that range.
Do you understand that this 1990 DWR document was one of those technical studies?
I'm not certain.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mullen, can we please go up to PDF page 15? And at the bottom of the first paragraph, do you see the sentence that starts nearly all the values? Mr. Parker?
Where are we again?
I'm sorry, bottom of the first paragraph?
Oh, okay. Yes, I do.
Do you see that in that sentence, DWR states that the 6.3% is not meant to represent the losses that are actually expected to occur?
Correct.
Do you know whether the Kern Water Bank Authority has considered this information in applying its 6% loss factor?
Well, the loss factor is determined in the Kern Water Bank MOU.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mullen, can we please pull up the Kern Water Bank MOU, which is KWBA 335? And Mr. Parker, do you recognize the document?
I do.
Ms. Mullen, can we please go to page 4 and paragraph 6? Mr. Parker, do you see that this paragraph 6 states a golden rule?
I do.
Do you believe that this is a portion of the MOU that applies to the water bank?
And to all the other banking programs on the Kern Fan. Yes.
And do you see that the golden rule states that the banker will not create conditions worse than would have prevailed absent the project, giving due recognition to the project benefits?
Kinsey, I'm going to again interpose an objection. I think we're well beyond the scope of the rebuttal testimony.
And Mr. Becerra, I suspect we're well beyond the scope, but I would like to give you a chance to respond. Can you connect this for me, please?
I believe Mr. Parker states that he relies on this MOU in his testimony. I mean, it's their exhibit.
Mr. O'Brien, do you want to respond to that?
I think his testimony focused on the 6% loss factor, which we've talked about. I don't think the mere fact that this was submitted as an exhibit opens it up to a broader discussion of the golden rule or anything else in this document. I think that's well beyond the scope of anything Mr. Parker discussed.
Ms. Kinsey, could I respond?
You may, yes.
The 6% loss factor directly affects how the water bank calculates whether it's how much water it has in storage.
And I understand that connection, Mr. Becerra. What I'm having trouble with is this golden rule and how that ties in here. Why are we looking at this in particular?
You know, Ms. Kinsey, I think I'll just stop at this
Okay.
point.
Thank you, Mr. Becerra.
Thank you. Can we please go back to KWA 329? And Mr. Parker, do you know whether that MOU uses a radius of 5 miles around the water bank as an area in which potential impacts may be determined?
I believe there's a statement to that effect.
And is the southern end of Buena Vista within 5 miles of the boundaries of the Kern Water Bank?
It is.
Thank you. Can we please go to Mr. Parker's? And actually, this would be a good place for a break, Ms. Kinsey, Mr. Parker, if we've been going
Mr.
about an
Parker,
hour.
Mr. Parker, would you like a break?
That's fine.
Okay. Let's go ahead. We'll take a break. Let's come back at 11:08. I will see you in 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Ready when you are.
Thank you. All right, I see Mr. Becerra, Mr. O'Brien, and Mr. Parker. So I will hand things off back to you, Mr. Becerra.
Thank you. Ms. Mullen, can we please go back to Mr. Parker's testimony in KWBA 328 and page 11? Perfect. Mr. Parker, do you see paragraph 32 in your testimony?
I do.
And in that paragraph, you're discussing Mr. Ashlock's statements about percolation and evaporation from cells 1, 2, and 2R in 2017. Is that right?
Correct.
Do you understand Dr. Davids calculated that approximately 12,000 acre feet of water evaporated from those cells in that year?
Oh, I don't recall specifically.
On, you see on line 31, you again cite KWBA 334.
I don't see line 31.
I'm sorry, line 11. You see on line 11,
Yes.
and on lines 11 through 12, you make the statement, this means that 95% of the water placed in KWBA recharge basins will percolate to groundwater. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you believe that's an accurate statement of what physically occurs at the Kern Water Bank?
It depends on the time of year. In the winter months when it's cold and evaporation rates are low, more than 95% may percolate to groundwater. In the heat of the summer, it could be less than that.
Thank you. Ms. Mullen, can we please pull up exhibit KWBA 334? And Mr. Parker, cells 1, 2, and 2R are located in the Buena Vista Lake bed. Is that right?
Yes.
Ms. Mullen, can we please go to PDF page 4, which is document page 5F. And can we please scroll down a little further, Ms. Mullen? Mr. Parker, do you see this section labeled water surface evaporation?
I do.
And Ms. Mullen, can we please scroll down to the next page, PDF page 6? And one more, so get past the figure. Thank you. For the record, this is document page 5.7. And Ms. Mullen, can we please scroll down a little further to the last page in that section? Mr. Parker, do you see the last paragraph above the heading Theatrophyte evapotranspiration?
Yes.
And do you see that in this paragraph, DWR stated an average evaporative demand from the San Joaquin Valley?
Yeah, I can't see the entire.
Oh, because of the Zoom box?
Yeah, the Zoom box is in the way. So maybe if she scrolls up some, or yeah.
Ms. Mullen, would you, maybe we could shrink the image, make it a little easier?
Did that help, Mr. Parker?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so in the paragraph, do you see that DWR states an average San Joaquin Valley evaporative demand?
I do.
Do you know whether they relied on that in stating evaporative demand for the Kern water bank in this document?
I don't.
Do you see that average evaporative demand at the bottom of the paragraph? They compared it to estimated Buena Vista Lake evaporation.
I do.
Do you see that they said that the two were consistent?
They look pretty consistent, yes.
Or actually DWR's phrase is they compared closely. Is that right?
Yes.
So do you understand that in this document, DWR compared estimated evaporative demands for the Kern water bank to evaporative demands from the Buena Vista Lake bed?
They may have. I'm not certain.
You rely on this document in stating a 6% recharge surface storage loss factor for the water bank. Is that right?
No, I just indicated that this was the result of a feasibility study that DWR did. I don't know if, the MOU relies on this. The 6% loss factor.
Can we please go back to Mr. Parker's testimony, KWBA 328? And Ms. Mullen, can we please go to page 11? I'm sorry we crashed Acrobat for you. Mr. Parker, do you see your paragraph 32 of your testimony?
Yes.
And on lines 9 through 11, or sorry, 9 through 12, you rely on that exhibit KWBA 334 in stating that 95% of water introduced to the water bank percolates to groundwater. Is that accurate?
I can't see the entire document. The Zoom box is in the way. Okay, can you ask the question again?
Sure. Do you see on lines 9 through 12, you rely on that DWR document that is exhibit KWBA 334 in stating that 95% of water that goes into the water bank will percolate to groundwater?
Well, I'm just making the observation that if losses in the Kern Water Bank area are 5%, then it means that 95% of the water placed in the recharge basins will percolate to groundwater.
And do you understand that that DWR document said that evaporative demands in the area of the bank compared closely to evaporative demands in Buena Vista Lake bed?
I believe that was stated.
Thank you. And Ms. Kinsey, I have no further questions for Mr. Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Becerra. I'm thinking through your questions, Mr. Becerra raised, just this last line of questioning raised it. I may be confused about something. So can we go back to Mr. Parker? I'm going to ask a question of Mr. Parker. I'll do my best, and maybe it's just a lawyer being confused about engineering. The document, I don't know if it's, I believe it's KWBA 334. It's the document we were just looking at in which DWR made the statement about comparing closely. Is that, Mr. Becerra, can you refresh my memory? Is that?
Yes, KWBA 334.
Ms. Mullen, can we please pull that up?
And just for clarity, it's on PDF page 6.
Thank you, Mr. Becerra.
And Ms. Mullen, it's that paragraph that cuts off at the bottom of the page.
Thank you. And if you'll all humor me for a moment and give me a moment to have attempt to have an engineering thought about this. Like, I just want to think this through. So I think I'll do my best to articulate. I'm trying to ask really a fundamental engineering question, Mr. Parker, and you may or may not be able to speak to this. So just let me know. But I don't mean to do anything complicated here. But I'm trying to understand when we're talking here about an evaporation coefficient. These statements here, the amount of evaporation that would occur one would expect would relate to this evaporation coefficient and then the surface area of the water body and the amount of time that has passed. Is that generally an accurate understanding of the factors that would help you understand how much water has evaporated?
Well, yeah, it would be related to the surface area, the time, and climate conditions. So it would vary through the year.
Yes. And then the amount of percolation that occurs would be a factor in calculating, may affect some of those factors. For example, if water percolates, the surface area may change of the water body, and it may affect the amount of time that the water is in the water body. Is that an accurate understanding of how percolation relates to these factors?
No,
Okay.
let me back up a little bit. So you're going to have evaporation going on in the southern San Joaquin Valley, and those rates are not going to vary dramatically, from one area to another. The difference is, and I think you can go back to Dr. David's Jack and Jill bucket analogy. If you're in an area where no water percolates to groundwater, your loss factor is going to be high. If you're in an area where a lot of water percolates to groundwater, your loss factor is going to be low. So if you think about it, the evaporation sits on the top of is the numerator, and the percolation rate is the denominator. Then you get your loss factor. So the difference between the Buena Vista lake beds and the Kern water bank and the Kern fan area, the whole Kern fan, is that the bottom of the bucket has big holes in the in the Kern fan area. The bottom of the bucket in the Buena Vista lake area, the sediments there are mostly silty clay and clay. This is shown on one of Dr. Miller's exhibits that Dr. David's talked about. The sediments in the Kern fan area are mostly sandy loams. And so those sediments absorb much more water or allow much more water to percolate. It's the relationship between evaporation and how much water goes in the ground that determines the loss factors that we're talking about. And that's why they're dramatically different in the two areas. If you had, no percolation at all, you'd have 100% loss factor. If you had all the water going in, let's say 99% of the water just rushed in through a sieve, you'd have a 1% loss factor. And so that's how that plays out. Is that clear, or does that help?
Yes, I think that's helpful. And as I understand, that's the point you were making. And I realize you don't have this in front of you, but I believe it's paragraph 32 of your rebuttal testimony speaks generally to this point about the loss factor. Is that accurate?
Correct. That if your loss factor is 5%, that means 95% would be going to ground, to the aquifer.
And then just to follow up to make sure I understand the statement here on this at KWBA 334 that we're looking at on the screen, discussing the evaporation coefficient and comparing the DWR's analysis with this analysis by Young. To some extent, this seems
This is just looking at the evaporation.
Just looking at the evaporation
Just
and,
evaporation.
yeah. So you would expect the coefficient because generally Buena Vista Lake is within the San Joaquin Valley and in the geographic area that they're in that same geographic area would be subject to the same climate conditions, et cetera. You'd expect that these coefficients would be similar, if not the same, understanding that they're from different studies.
Correct.
Thank you. That was that was an inartful way of getting around to what I was trying to make sure I understood. Thank you, Mr. Parker, for humoring me. I really appreciate that.
You're more than welcome.
I think that is the only question I just wanted to follow up on. With that, I will turn to, well, let me just formally ask the room, does anyone else have cross-examination questions for Mr. Parker at this time? So I will turn to you, Mr. O'Brien. Do you have redirect for Mr. Parker?
I do.
You may proceed, unless you need, if you would like a few minutes to think
No,
about it.
I was having some trouble with my screen, but it's
Okay.
somehow fixed itself. So
Okay.
I think we can proceed, and I'll be very brief.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Ms. Mullen, if we could pull up Mr. Parker's rebuttal testimony, KWBA 328, document page 13, paragraph 40. And I'll just say, Mr. Parker, I'm going to ask you some questions relating to the cross-examination by Mr. CUNY, and I just wanted to draw your attention to a couple aspects of your testimony before I get into that. So the first aspect is the first sentence in paragraph 40, where you talk about the notice order process. I won't bother to read that sentence, but if you can just read that to yourself.
Yeah.
And then if we could, Ms. Mullen, flip back a page to document page 12, paragraph 37. And there's a long single-spaced quote there, which I believe you're quoting from Ms. Melton's testimony. And I'd like to draw your attention in particular to the second paragraph, where Ms. Melton describes the so-called pre-notice order process. There, about halfway through that paragraph, she says this first stage is commonly referred to as the pre-notice order, and then she says that the next stage is referred to as the notice order. So Mr. CUNY asked you some questions relating to certain agreements relating to the notice order process, and you said you had not considered them in connection with your testimony. Is that correct?
Yes.
But had you, in connection with your testimony, considered your more general understanding of how the process works on a practical level?
Yes, and certainly, the process is pretty well laid out here. There's, the pre-notice order process, is a call to all the Kern River interests that, there could be issues in Lake Isabella. And so, my understanding of how the process works in discussions with Kern River Water Master, former Kern River Water Master, is there is a negotiation essentially that goes on, or discussion that goes on, talking about how much water can the Kern River interests take. And if the Kern River interests say they can take all the water, you wouldn't go to the next stage. If they can't, you'd move on to the next stages. But that's not something that is, open to everyone. It's just an internal discussion between the Kern River interests.
And when you say the Kern River interests, who are you talking about?
Well, First Point and Second Point and Lower River.
Is the Kern Water Bank Authority invited to participate in that process?
No.
So when you say in your testimony that the notice order process has no objective triggers, no formal process, and no transparency, are you primarily talking about this pre-notice order process?
Yes.
And how would you contrast that then with the what Ms. Melton calls the second stage, the notice order?
When a notice order goes out, it means it's very likely that there's going to be spill. In other words, mandatory release occurring. And when that happens, then you move on to the flood policy, and that's when people are told. The other folks in Kern County are told, if you can take water, you can fill out these forms and you can get this water.
Now back to the pre-notice order stage. This may be obvious from your previous answer, but I just want to make sure it's clear on the record. So members of the general public would not be invited to participate in that pre-notice order stage. Is that correct?
Yeah, as far as I know, there's no interaction with the general public at that point in time.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. I will turn first to Mr. Cooney. Do you have any recross for Mr. Parker?
Just briefly, yes. So, Mr. Parker, you've now clarified that your comments really in paragraph 40 are directed at the pre-notice process as distinguished from the notice order process. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you've confirmed that as to the notice order process, that there are various intertie agreements, none of which you considered in your testimony in paragraph 40 of your rebuttal testimony, correct?
Correct.
And your personal knowledge and experience.
Well, I should back up, other than the flood policy document.
And the flood policy document you clarified was actually, that's the notice order process. That's the formal process after mandatory release and flood control operations have commenced, correct?
That's the way it reads, yes.
And your personal knowledge and experience with regard to the notice order process is subsequent to your employment, which I think is, what is it, 1996?
1999.
1999, okay. So after the 1998 intertie operation, correct?
Correct.
And did you have any personal knowledge in regard to the only other intertie operation that occurred since 1998, that being 2006? Did you have personal knowledge with regard to that?
Yeah, and that was triggered again by, as we all know, the Corps of Engineers got nervous about the dam at Lake Isabella and said, we got to empty the lake.
Right. And that's the other question I wanted to ask you. And that's right. We all agree that in 2006, that was an extraordinary circumstance due to dam safety concerns by the Army Corps and the integrity of the auxiliary and main dams, correct?
Yeah, that's my understanding.
I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cooney. Mr. Jacobs, do you have any recross for Mr. Parker?
Just briefly, yes.
Please go ahead.
Mr. Parker, you made a distinction during your testimony today between entitlements and water rights. Can you explain how you understand that distinction?
Well, I'm going to object. This is supposed to be further examination based on the question that I asked, questions that I asked. I don't think we've opened this up now to other lines of questioning.
I think that's a fair objection, Mr. O'Brien. I sustain the objection. I'll also just note that I think we've been through this discussion about entitlements and rights before. And with that, Mr. Jacobs, do you have any other questions for Mr. Parker that are within the scope of Mr. O'Brien's redirect?
No further questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. And I should add, just to clarify, and the scope of my questions, I think that's fair game too. Put that out there. Mr. Becerra, do you have any recross for Mr. Parker?
I do, and Ms. Kinsey, you read my mind. I was going to ask whether I could ask a couple based on your questions. Ms. Mullen, could we please pull up exhibit KWBA 334? And Mr. Parker, do you see that paragraph? And we're on, I believe we're on PDF page 6. Document page F7. Mr. Parker, do you see that paragraph that starts based on an annual average or average annual?
Yeah, and again, I can't see the whole paragraph, but
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Mullen. Do you see that that paragraph uses the term annual water surface evaporation?
yes,
And an annual measure of evaporation potentially could incorporate considerations of percolation. Is that right?
no,
Evaporation as an annual measure would not include that.
no.
Thank you. I have nothing further, Ms. Kinsey.
Thank you, Mr. Becerra. With that, I believe we've completed the examination of Mr. Parker. Thank you, Mr. Parker, so much for joining us once again. I appreciate your time and I appreciate your testimony. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think what I'd like to do is go ahead and proceed with the rebuttal testimony of Mr. Torres. And then we can decide whether it's appropriate to break. I'll probably ask for estimates of time to cross-examine Mr. Torres once we hear his summary of his testimony. And then we can decide whether to break for lunch before cross or attempt to begin. Mr. O'Brien, do you have a comment about that?
Yes, I think in the interest of time, we are simply going to have Mr. Torres identify his written testimony. He did not provide a PowerPoint, and then make him available for cross-examination.
Okay, thank you, Mr. O'Brien. So then let's plan, we'll get through that and then I will turn to cross-examination before we break for lunch. So please, if we can, Mr. O'Brien, when you're ready, please call Mr. Torres and I will swear him in.
Yes, we'll need a couple minutes to reconfigure here, but we'll do that right now.
Sure, thank you.
Ms. Kinsey, it looks like we may need to take a 5-minute break to accomplish this. So
That makes sense and I should have suggested it. So let's go ahead and take 5 minutes. We'll come back at 11:42.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien.
Mr. O'Brien, do you know in Mr. Parker's testimony how to spell Dr. Kreutz or Krutz or something?
Roots and you know what? I think I better get that from him.
Okay, maybe at lunch, yeah.
Yeah, it's something like CREWDSON, but I better get the correct.
Okay, yeah, I meant to look it up, but I only just now had time to go through my notes and find it, so thanks.
Yeah.
All right, let's go ahead and pick up, please. I see we have, I think, those who I expect on camera. And with that, good morning, Mr. Torres. I'm glad you could join us. Will you please raise your right hand? Mr. Torres, do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you will give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. You may proceed, Mr. O'Brien.
Thank you, Ms. Kinsey. Good morning, Mr. Torres.
Morning, Mr. O'Brien.
We're going to make this part very brief. Ask you first of all whether exhibit KWBA 600 is a true and correct copy of the written rebuttal testimony you prepared for this matter?
Yes, it is.
And is KWBA 601 a true and correct copy of your professional qualifications?
It is.
So with that, Ms. Kinsey, we will make Mr. Torres available for cross-examination.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Mr. Becerra, do you have questions for this witness, or if this is a compound question, do you have agreements with your colleagues about who will begin cross-examination?
I have questions. I don't have agreements.
Okay, well then I'll look to you first. Mr. Becerra, you may proceed with your questions for Mr. Torres.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Torres. I'm Ryan Becerra. I'm the attorney for Buena Vista Water Storage District. At times when I'm asking questions, I'll probably just use the words Buena Vista. And when I do that, I just mean Buena Vista Water Storage District. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mullen, can we please pull up Mr. Torres' testimony exhibit KWBA 600 and go to page 5? Thank you. Mr. Torres, do you see paragraph 10?
Which paragraph?
10?
Yes,
And in that paragraph, you discuss Andrew Bell's testimony, is that right?
that is correct.
And you critique Mr. Bell's testimony based on his number for losses in 2017 from the outlet canal. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. And just for clarity of the record, when you were Buena Vista's hydrographer, did you participate in operating the outlet canal?
Yes, I did.
Ms. Mullis, can we please pull up exhibit Buena Vista 818? And Ms. Mullen, can we pull back a little bit so Mr. Torres can see the whole page? And Mr. Torres, I'll represent to you, this exhibits 2 pages that show Google images, just so we can have some geographic clarity about what we're talking about. So if, do you see on the first page of exhibit Buena Vista 818, it shows the outlet canal and something called the elk pin?
Yes, I do.
And does this image accurately represent where the outlet canal and the elk pin are located?
Yeah, it seems pretty accurate.
Ms. Mullen, can we please scroll down to the next page? And Mr. Torres, this is a closer up image of the outlet canal near the elk pin. Does this image accurately depict where the two are located?
Yes,
So the squiggly lines there, they're the elk pin.
correct.
And is that part of a Thule elk reserve?
Yes, it's part of the state Thule Elk Reserve.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mullen, can we please pull up exhibit Buena Vista 327? Thank you, Ms. Mullen. And can we please click on the middle tab 2017 in district? Thank you very much. And can we please scroll down so we can see rows 38 and 47? Thank you. Mr. Torres, the row 38 labeled outlet canal, is that the source of information for your discussion of Mr. Bell's testimony?
I can't see the whole, there's boxes on the right. Can you zoom in a little bit more? Ms. Mullen? Or I mean, excuse me, zoom out. Thank you. Yes,
Just for clarity of the record, that row 38 is your source of information for discussing Mr. Bell's testimony, correct?
that would be correct.
And rows 38 through 50 are labeled recharge in district. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's the heading on the left.
Okay. And do you see row 47 that's labeled Thule elk?
Yes, I do.
Do you understand that to mean the elk pin that we just looked at?
It would be apparent that that's where that would be located at for the Thule elk.
And Buena Vista routes water into the elk pin sometimes. Is that right?
That would be correct.
And is that elk pin used as a groundwater recharge facility?
Yes,
And so would in your experience, would Buena Vista route water into the elk pin for recharge in wetter years?
yeah. So in big wet years, they would put water in there for recharge.
And did you say big wet years? I just didn't quite hear.
Or in big years, any years that are above normal.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mullen, can we please go to Mr. Torres's exhibit KWBA 602? And Mr. Torres, did you assemble this whole exhibit when you worked at Buena Vista?
No, this exhibit or this file was actually my predecessor, Don Kurtz, who was there for about 40 years as the hydrographer.
And so did you input data into this file from Mr. Kurtz's time?
Yes, I did. Mr. Kurtz, I think, left around 2000 or somewhere in there. So I put data into that specific file. I will clarify that I only worked on this file from page 1 to 15, which the last page is WD8. And any pages after that was done by the engineer or engineer manager.
Okay, I want to make sure I understand that. Did you say page 8?
No, it'd be WD8, which would be the tab would be the last of these tables. And then there's a series of other tables that were done by others, by management. So if you go through that and go down to, I believe W88 is the Henry Miller page.
Okay. Can you, Ms. Mullen, can we scroll through the document? I think it's 22 pages.
So
So we identify
might be page 15.
15. Thank you. So is this the last page that you?
Correct.
So when you were Buena Vista's hydrographer, would you only fill in up to page 15 of this document?
Yes, I only worked up on page from the first page from 1 to 15. I didn't really ever work with the previous pages or the last pages. I think there's like 7 more pages.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mullen, can you please go to page 8? And so just to clarify generally, this document recorded Buena Vista's operations downstream of Second Point. Is that right? Just generally, not page 8.
Oh, yes.
Okay. And so if it would not include exchanges that occurred via diversions upstream of Second Point. Is that accurate?
Yeah, as per my testimony in Exhibit 600, I believe I wrote that in, that this is basically anything at Second Point and below Second Point. Any other records would be in the Kern River Water Master and the CVC Water Agency Water Summary reports.
Okay, thank you. And actually, Ms. Mullen, can we please go to page 16? Okay, so Mr. Torres, is this a page that you did not handle of this spreadsheet?
Correct.
So the columns total outside use, you don't know what they mean?
See, I can't read it.
Ms. Mullen, can we blow it up so Mr. Torres can see the heading?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. Do you see the heading total outside use?
Yes,
And it has a variety of acronyms underneath it. Is that accurate?
correct.
And so did you not participate in the preparation of this page at all?
No, I only prepared the pages before that, and this table looks like it takes, if I remember correctly, probably numbers associated with the inputs that I put in based off other reports.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so can we please go back to page 8, Ms. Mullen? And Mr. Torres, do you see the left-hand columns labeled spreading, outlet canal, or elk pin?
Yes, I do.
Preliminarily, what does the term spreading mean there?
I think that the heading spreading depicted like putting water for intentional recharge.
Okay, so when we see spreading on this exhibit, that generally means intentional recharge?
Correct.
Okay. And do you see also towards the left-hand side, there's a column heading KR and X?
Yes, I do.
Does that mean Kern River and exchange water?
So that would be Kern River and Kern River State Exchange water. So any water that was exchanged with others.
So that would be state water project water Buena Vista received as part of an exchange for Kern River water. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Now, the numbers in those columns spreading outlet canal or elk pin, those numbers are some combination of recharge through those two facilities. Is that right?
Yeah, it could be either or it could include both.
Okay. And the numbers in those columns, they don't show up every year, right?
Correct.
So does that indicate, consistent with what you said, that sometimes there would be spreading in wetter years?
Yes, so for example, this year, very dry, critical year, you would not put water in the elk pen.
Right. Okay. And so let's look at 2011. Ms. Mullen, could you blow up on 2011 there? So 2011 was a wetter year, is that right?
To my knowledge, yes.
Okay. And so it shows that for the Kern River and exchange water, about 18,644 acre feet was spread in either the outlet canal or the elk pin. Is that accurate?
Either or a combination of both.
Okay. And you were Buena Vista's hydrographer in 2011, is that right?
That would be correct.
Ms. Mullen, can we please go back to Mr. Bell's exhibit Buena Vista 327? It's actually an Excel spreadsheet, so I've added one more level of complication for you. I'm sorry. And Mr. Torres, do you understand that this spreadsheet is for the year 2017?
According to the tab, it says 2017.
Okay. And was 2017 a wet year?
It was an above normal year, so I would consider it a wet year.
So would that be the kind of year you would expect Buena Vista to route water into the elk pin for recharge?
It typically depends on the management, how much they want to do for recharge and what kind of direction we get from them. But I would expect, I don't want to speculate and say that they would do it, but more than likely they would.
If you add the numbers for outlet canal on row 38 and the numbers for elk pin on row 47, every month would have a different number. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mullen, can we please go back to Mr. Torres's testimony, KWBA 600? And can we please go to the bottom of page 4, looking for paragraph 9? And Mr. Torres, do you see where you discuss Button Willow Canal losses?
Yes.
And you cite them as averaging 35,700 acre feet, is that right?
That is correct.
And those would not include losses from Buena Vista's Maple service area canals, is that right?
If I'm trying to recall, I believe it's both. Can we go down a little bit? Let me make sure. Read through.
Sure.
Can we go back up? Ms. Mullen, thank you. Yeah, so that's for Benuelo Canal losses.
Okay.
Service.
And you cite your KBWA 602 spreadsheet to support that 35,700 acre feet number. Is that right?
Yeah, that would be an average of numbers on one of those pages between 1962 and 2013.
Okay. And Ms. Mon, can we scroll down a little bit so Mr. Torres can see the next page? And specifically, you cite page 10 of that document for that information. Is that accurate?
Yeah, can we look at page 10? I just want to make sure I'm the same.
Yeah. Let's, yes, Ms. Mullen, let's please go to exhibit KWBA 602, page 10. And yeah. Okay, and Mr. Torres, I just want to understand, so I see on this page, there's field deliveries for Buttonwillow, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, now I don't see any columns for Buttonwillow losses. Where would I find that information here?
So the far right, where it says canal losses, internal system,
And those numbers are for just the Buttonwillow service area?
that is just for the Benuelo area. Yeah.
Okay. And I don't see any average losses for the Buttonwillow service area on this page. Where would I find that information?
I did an average of all those losses.
When you say all those losses, what columns are you indicating?
Well, it doesn't have column numbers, but it'd be from KRX all the way to reclamation.
Okay, and Ms. Mullen, can we blow it up a little bit so Mr. Torres can focus on those right-hand columns a little more? Okay. And so, Mr. Torres, you're saying how did you do your calculation to reach that average number?
So I took the sum of every year on all those individual lines and then did an average of all those, of all the years.
Okay, and Ms. Mullen, can we scroll to the bottom of this page? There's some total numbers at the bottom. So, Mr. Torres, do you see that last line there on this page? And
Part of it's blocked, but I can see part of it.
Okay. Ms. Mullen, can we pull back a little so Mr. Torres can see all the numbers? So that last line in acre feet, did you use those numbers in your calculations?
I believe that's the numbers I used.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Torres, there are a number of years in these columns where losses exceed 40,000 acre feet. Is that right?
It appears to be so, yes.
Do you know how many years that was?
Not to the top of my knowledge now.
Okay. And Ms. Mullen, can we scroll up a little so we can see the numbers for the year 1967? And in 1967, is it correct that just the Kern River and exchange water losses equaled almost 51,000 acre feet?
According to the table, yes.
Okay. And do you see the line for 1995?
Yes.
And Ms. Mullen, can we blow that up a little bit so it's a little easier for Mr. Torres to read? Yeah, there, thank you. So we need to see 1995 and those right-hand columns. Wait, are we still on page 8, Ms. Mullen? Oh, I'm sorry. We should be on page 10. My apologies. There we go. Mr. Torres, we need to scroll down to 1995. It might be a little hard to get it all on the screen. Okay, so let's start. Mr. Torres, do you see for 1995 in the column for Kern River and exchange water, there's a loss number of 52,362 acre feet?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And Ms. Mullen, can we scroll over a little so Mr. Torres can see all the columns all the way to the right-hand side? Can you see all the columns, Mr. Torres?
I only see two of them. You can scroll just a little bit more to the left.
I'm not, well, maybe she can. I don't know how far she can go, or we'll
Oh,
flip over to the other page, but let us know if you can't see what you need to see.
I see some columns, but not all the way to the right.
Mr. Torres, do you know whether total Button Willow canal system losses in 1995 exceeded 55,000 acre feet? And we'll need to go back to page 10.
Yeah, I think we've flipped over to page 11.
So, Mr. Torres, can you tell whether total Button Willow canal losses in 1995 exceeded 55,000 acre feet?
It appears to be pretty close to around the 55,000.
Okay. And did you start working at Buena Vista in 1989?
It was May of 1989.
So you worked at Buena Vista during part of the 1987 to 1992 drought?
Correct.
To the best of your recollection, was 1995 the first wet year after that drought?
I believe so.
Do you think that canal losses were high in 1995, partly because the system was dry after the drought?
No, I don't deal too much with ground or
Okay,
the geology of that stuff, so I was more of a operator
Okay.
and operated the system.
thank you. Do you see in 1996, the Kern River and exchange losses exceeded 41,000 acre feet?
It looks like around that total.
And do you see in 1997, the total losses exceeded 50,000 acre feet?
What year was that?
1997?
Numbers are really small on my screen.
Yeah,
I'm doing math at almost, is that a 30,000?
Ms. Mull, can we blow it up a little bit so we can see 1997 a little better?
So no, it looks like it's more like, oh, that's a different page.
I think we've, yeah. Yeah,
Well, let's see.
okay. Do you see the 1997 numbers, Mr. Torres?
Oh, yeah. Yes, I see it now.
Do you see the total canal losses in 1997 exceeded 50,000 acre feet?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Kinsey, I can continue and work through Mr. Torres's cross. I think I probably have half an hour or 45 minutes maybe. But I don't know if you want to break for lunch.
I think we do. So thank you for that suggestion. I think we should, let's see, on my clock, it is 12:13. I'd suggest we break an hour for lunch until 1:15 p.m. But before we do, I'll look to the room. Is there anything else we need to address? Otherwise, we'll come back and you may pick up Mr. Bizzaro with cross-examination of Mr. Torres.
Thank you.
All right, I'll see all of you at 1:15. Oh, a reminder to please log out of the Zoom and then log back in when we return using the same link.